Hello there and welcome to this edition of the program People, Politics and Power. I am Imoni Amarere. Last Wednesday, with just a little over 3 weeks to the end of the 8-year lifespan of the Muhammadu Buhari administration, the president launched what the government called Nigeria Agenda 2050, a new long-term development plan. The details of the plan, beyond what was unveiled at the launch, are yet to be in the public domain. But what do we know of the plan presently, and what are its general principles? Why has it taken a better part of the 8 years of the Buhari government to formulate and make public this long-term development plan? Here are the key points of what we know about Nigeria Agenda 2050 for now. 1. It is aimed at ensuring that Nigeria attains a GDP per capita of $33,328 per annum to place the country among the top middle-income economies in the world by 2050. This will mean a big leap from the 2021 GDP per capita of $2,069, according to the World Bank data that's available. 2. The plan envisions a dynamic, industrialized, and knowledge-based economy that generates inclusive and sustainable development for the country. 3. It is the successor plan to Nigeria Vision 2020 and the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan, otherwise known as ERGP, which ran from 2017 to 2020, as well as the 5-year medium-term plans, the National Development Plan that is expected to run between 2021 and 2025. 4. The plan is designed to address subsisting economic and social challenges facing the country, such as fragile and non-inclusive growth, insecurity, high population growth rate, limited concentric economic diversification, and low productivity. And number 5, to increase capital accumulation, investment as a ratio of GDP from the current 29.40% to 40.11% by the year 2050. Number 6, to significantly drop unemployment to 6.3% in 2050 from 33.3% as it was in 2020. And number 7, to drop the number of people in poverty from 83 million, that's the figure that was estimated in 2020, to as low as 2.1% in 2050. Now, some critics of the plan have said that it is long in its visioning, big on promise, but low on creativity and short in implementation strategy. With 2050 just 27 short years away, was on ground to realize the goals set out in the agenda by 2050. Why were the targets of Visions 2020 and 2020, as well as the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan, not met or achieved? Have the obstacles that impeded those plans been cleared from the way of attaining the goals of Nigeria Agenda 2050? And very importantly, how does Nigeria Agenda 2050 differ from all previous national development plans or strategies, long, medium, or short-term, as they were christened at those times? What are its underlying principles and philosophy. Well, these are the issues we will be looking at today, and I will be joined by two development economists who will be taking a deeper look at the issues. That's when we return from this short break. Stay with us. Nigeria Agenda 2050. What is it all about? What are its underlying principles and philosophy? What is on ground to achieve that goal in just 27 short years from now? Right? I'm joined in the studio by two very eminent Nigerians. First, from my immediate right is Professor Uche Uwaleke. He is the president, Capital Market Academics of Nigeria. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Moni, for inviting me.
Welcome.
My pleasure.
Also joining us is Mr. Oladayo Alao. He is a policy analyst. Thank you, Mr. Alao, for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Welcome.
Thank
All
you.
right, to kickstart our discussion, let's take a listen to what the Minister of National Planning said at the launch of the Nigeria Agenda 2050.
The 2050 Agenda highlights the roadmap for accelerated, sustained, and broad-based growth, and also provides broad frameworks and approaches for reducing unemployment, poverty, inequality, and human deprivation. More specific strategies or programs, interventions, and the important task of implementation will be articulated through 6-number 5-year medium-term plan. Like I said earlier, 2021 to 2025, 2026 to 2030, 2031 to 2035, 2036 to 2040, 2041 to 2045, and 2046 to 2050. The broad objectives are the following: to create a stable and predictable macroeconomic environment by adopting policies that are consistent with raising domestic savings and investments. 2, to establish a solid foundation for a concentric, diversified, private sector-led economy, a more resilient business environment that creates and supports opportunities for Nigerians to realize their potentials.
Mr. Clem Agba is Nigeria's Minister of National Planning, and there was outlining what the objectives of the Development Plan 2050 is all about. Gentlemen, thank you so much for finding your time to join us.
Thank you so much for having us.
Let me first and foremost harvest your thoughts on this new plan, Nigeria Agenda 2050.
Thanks, Imoni. I've actually seen it. You know, it's a perspective a plan, perspective in the sense that it's a long-term plan, you know, vision 2050. I think the closest we've had has been the vision 2020, recall, the one that started in 2009, that, you know, was expected to end by 2020. I think it's better late than never, because what it means is that the next government, you know, has already has something to run with. One of the challenges that the current administration faced, you know, has to do with the fact that there was no plan for the first 2 years that the government, you know, was in office. It was not until 2017 that the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan, you know, was launched. And that, of course, affected the performance during the first tenure. So now that we have a plan, at least a perspective plan, as I said, the next administration will now have something, you know, to work with. Remember too that this perspective plan already has the first leg, which was launched, you know, last year. That's talking about the 2021 to 2025 medium-term, plan. Just as you had, the Minister of State there, you had him say that, there will be 6 of such medium-term plans up to 2050. So already the first one is in place, and I expect that whoever is coming next, should work with that 2021 to 2025, plan. So there's already a head start, sort of, which is also why I think that, yes, one might say we've had plans since 1962. We've had since the first National Development Plan, 62 to 68. We had 70 to 74. We had 75 to 80. We had 80 to 85. The first 4 National Development Plans, and since then we've had NEETs. We've had this Vision 2010, okay, and so on and so forth. One could argue that many of those plans never achieved their objectives. And just as you had him saying, the broad objective has to do with diversifying the economy, creating a predictable macro economic environment. And these are things you will also find even in the first National Development Plan. So the challenge has been there, okay? So going forward, what is important now is looking at the previous plans, identifying the the bottlenecks, and then trying to see how one can overcome them. And overcoming them means concentrating on monitoring and evaluation, okay, and then of course implementing, and then monitoring and evaluation, which in my mind, have been the bane of the previous national development plans we've had.
Mr. Lau, what are your thoughts? Some people have said that, have expressed concern. Why is this national development plan, the longest ever projected in the history of Nigeria, coming so late in the life of this administration? In fact, in the twilight of this administration. Because it was launched only last Wednesday. It was just about 26 days to the end of the administration.
Yes, so I think that's a good point, but at the same time, you have to take into context the existing macroeconomic, indicators that we are currently facing. It's not like, the current administration has not had previous plans. You mentioned the ERGP, which, of course, we know that we had 2 recessions that impacted the implementation of the ERGP, 2016 and in 2020, due to the COVID, the pandemic. Now, what is really interesting is that, again, Nigeria, we're excellent at preparing these documents. It's important to note that, of course, everybody says that if you fail to plan, you are planning to fail. So it's important that we have a plan in place. That's a given. However, where we've always struggled is with implementation. Now, the plan is very specific in terms of it sets up a structure for monitoring, the implementation of this plan. What I would have expected, because I watched the Honorable Minister's speech, was, to give an update on where we are with the National Development Plan 2021 to 2025, because then that gives comfort that something is being done, and we can get an update on where we are with the implementation of that plan, which will help to dovetail into the National Agenda 2050. On paper, it's a fantastic plan, gives really good frameworks because it's a plan. But that framework is only at the strategic level. We have to think of, the tactical level. How do we ensure that the ministries, departments, and agencies that are, charged with delivering on this plan with their plans and programs align with the framework of the plan? Then we have to get down to the operational elements. How do we on a day-to-day basis ensure that we are driving how this plan is implemented? And of course, that all revolves again around monitoring and evaluation, right? Which, the other speaker has already spoken on. The bane of, all the plans that we've made. We've made wonderful plans. In fact, do you know several other African countries actually look at Nigeria in terms of our plans and take elements of, a lot of the documentation. We're amazing at preparing these plans, but where we fall short is with implementation. Now, he mentioned specifically continuity. Now, one of the biggest challenges we've had with implementing any of these plans is policy continuity. So a new administration comes in, and then they have a different plan. They have a different perspective on how they actually want to go about economic development. But I think this is a really good document, and for once, my recommendation to the incoming administration is to look at this really good framework, as I put it. As a framework for economic growth, diversification, social inclusion, that can actually transform Nigeria. I mean, let's take lessons learned from various other countries. Let's look at Japan. When Japan came up with their development plan, although they took it, they have this agile project methodology that they call Kanban, which enables them to track almost on a daily basis how they were doing in terms of development. They've had about 6 plans, and their GDP, they're in the top 6 countries in the world. Malaysia has done the same thing. China set a plan for itself, but they stuck to that plan over a period of time. So are we going to stick to the plan? My general view on the plan is it's a really good document. I mean, I'm still in the process of studying it because it was only recently launched, but
it's not even been made available in public for the rest of us to look at.
Yes. It's actually online, so you can actually download it.
The details, the nitty-gritty. But we are told, for instance, that those who were involved in his making, his formulation, included from the federal level to state government to local government. We have had, like he said, about 5 major national development plans. Then we have had Vision 2010, Vision 2020. We have had the transformation agenda. We have had the economic growth and development plan and all of that. Is there a difference between those and this one now? Is it in terms of the involvement of those who made this document, who were involved in the formulation of this document? Will that eventually play out in its implementation, in the buy-in of all the other sectors of society?
Yeah, so the plan is very clear in terms of, the expected involvement of those different stakeholders that were involved in the actual development of the plan, from states to local government. It even goes on to stipulate in terms of the expected investments that are going to come from the federal, state, and local government level. I think it's about, for the NDP, it's about 50 trillion over the medium-term period. And then I think the NDP estimates about 348 trillion naira, out of which, I think about 15% of that is meant to come from federal, states, and local government. So they've been involved in the development of the plan. Now, what I expect next is the plan mentions that there is going to be an implementation monitoring committee. So I mean, I even expected that we would have started, if we're really serious about implementing this plan, pulling together what that implementation and monitoring committee looks like. Are we bringing in, what state governors are we bringing? We have 774 local governments, which they receive like a monthly allocation of maybe about 100+ million. What are they even doing with that money now? I think that the new government should also look at, sort of rejigging that revenue allocation formula to make the local governments more responsible and more productive in terms of, whatever allocations are given to them. And that, cascades all the way to the top, to the federal level. Our focus has always been too much on the federal level. And an interesting thing for me is that, this plan hasn't actually changed that narrative, because it still skews most of, the investment towards the federal government level. Whereas you expect that, at this stage, we should be looking at development at the grassroots level, local government level. And another very interesting thing for me is that, like I said, it's a fantastic plan, but I always struggle with, the premise of that plan. We don't know how many people are in Nigeria. I don't know if you know. I don't know.
We're trying to conduct a census.
We should.
To determine how many we are.
But my view is that, who are we planning for? How many people are in Nigeria really? We don't know that, So we've done this amazing plan. They use the model, which is accepted in economics, and that's fine, based on estimates that we get from the NBS, the World Bank estimates, but we ourselves, We need to invest in a data repository, one that harmonizes everybody that is in Nigeria. You know, one of the things I struggle with is if we're looking to bring in private investment, either foreign direct investment or even local investors who want to invest in any of the sectors, agricultural, manufacturing, whatever it is, security is a big issue. Now, we've had several issues where someone will commit a crime in Ibadan today and he will move to Kano and he doesn't have a face. You know, when you look at most of the developed countries, they have like a central repository that we know. We've done things like BVN. Okay, that's purely financial, which will expire in about 10 years. You have to renew that. We've recently come up with the NIN, right? Now, I would have thought that, you know, with the infrastructure that we have, for example, within the INEC, you know, like the BVAS, the IREV, we could leverage some of that. We don't have to spend all that 300 and something billion that they're estimating for the census, right? Why don't we invest that in the back-end infrastructure that can harness all of this data? And suddenly we know where everybody is. We know who everybody is. Everybody has a face in Nigeria. We know the numbers. Then, the plan doesn't specifically talk about, you know, sort of the enlightenment aspect, you know. When China realized that its population was exploding, they brought a policy, you know, the family policy where, you know, we could only, now this plan estimates that we're going to have about 400 million people in 27 years, right? And estimates that we will have about 200 million of those in a job, right? For me, you know, I think about 400 million people in Nigeria. That is a lot of people. You know, we should start to look at enlightening people about family planning. You know, only have kids that you can look after. You know, we have, you know, most of our population is within 15 to 35. You know, it means we are churning out babies on a daily basis, babies that we don't know how we are going to cater for. And then we have a beautiful plan, you know, that estimates that we're going to have 400 million people. And that is a lot of people, you know. Then we should have intervals, you know. By now, I expect that as we launched this plan, we should be giving Nigeria, we are midway through the NDP 2021 to 2025. We don't have any official statements that says, you know, in terms of the National Development Plan, this is the status, this is where we are. Then that gives an opportunity to take input from Nigerians in terms of the updates that are provided, and then we can do a rejigging of that plan if there is a need. I'm sure you would agree with me.
Oh, yes.
So let me just,
yes.
don't let me hold the...
Yes, I completely agree with you. You see, this Agenda 2050 is actually a long-term plan. And I feel more comfortable staying with the medium-term plans, you know, because of uncertainties, you know, associated with long-term...
External shocks.
Yes, long-term plans, you know, 2021 to 2025. And if you look at previous plans, one major factor that has affected them, I think he even mentioned it, you know, has to do with, you know, this continuity. And one way that some other countries have address this issue of continuity is to provide a legal backing for the plan. You have a plan that is being presented by the executive arm that doesn't have a legal backing. Okay, there is nothing that compels successive governments to continue with that document, right? And that's why Puerto Rico, for example, recognizing that, had to you know, pass a bill, the fiscal responsibility bill, you know, to ensure continuity of their plan. So I think this document also requires a legal backing. Let the National Assembly also, you know, support it by giving it a legal backing, such that whoever comes there, okay, will be compelled to at least implement key aspects, you know, of that plan. All right. That is one. The other thing is...
It becomes a legal document.
Yes, it becomes a legal document.
Yes,
so
because
even when
as
you
it
come,
is now,
you come with your
just
own...
been launched by the executive.
Yes.
It's not been sent to the...
It's a policy
Remember
document.
too that the Agenda 2050, you know, I called it a perspective plan, you know, a broad plan. The medium-term plans are supposed to draw from that perspective, supposed to be tied to that. Our annual budget, okay, are also expected to be tied to the medium-term plan and the perspective plan, which is the Agenda 2050. And the only way you can ensure that annual budgets are tied to that, again, is to have the backing of the National Assembly. Okay, so the National Assembly, as I said, should have a way of, whether it's, of course it has to be by legislation, to give backing, to that document. Now, the document has also said that ownership, will be taken by the ministries, departments, and agencies. Okay, and for me, that also speaks to the current structure of our MDAs. Okay, I think for that to work, the current structure of the MDAs, needs to be looked into. There are talks about there are talks about rationalizing, ministry, department, and agencies because they are unwieldy. If you take ministries, for example, I don't think we need as many as 28, ministries, or even as many as currently, I think we have about 43 ministers. All right, so we should even start from there. The next administration, will be well advised to begin by looking at how to rationalize ministries, okay, as a first step, and then appointing people, with requisite knowledge and competencies to man those ministries. I'm talking about portfolio, and of course, before sending names to the National Assembly, I expect that their portfolios,
that's constitutional now.
Yes, yes. Oh, beautiful.
Yes.
Will be attached, and it's also important that in appointing ministers for certain ministries, it's important that those ministries are, professionalized. Okay, so the way you appoint a medical doctor or a medical personnel for health, or the way you also appoint a lawyer to be the Attorney General, is also the way you should appoint experts for education, experts for, say, power. The critical ministries should be professionalized. You don't just appoint a politician, in those ministries. So I think these are the low-hanging fruits, the first steps, towards implementing any plan or any agenda that you have. And just as he mentioned, I like to stay with the 2021 to 2025, because that's the one we know. Okay, that one talks about a financing size of 348 trillion naira. The government bringing 15%, the private sector, bringing 85%. For the private sector to come in and play, there has to be an enabling environment for the private sector to come in. Even the one that is meant to be provided by the government. As you can see now, the fiscal situation of the government, whether at the federal or the state level, okay, does not really support that. Okay, I'm making reference to our level of borrowing. Okay, the country's public debt today, okay, would not allow the government to be able to finance, meet its own obligations in terms of the financing. All right, except we look inwards, reduce particularly external borrowing, and see how we can widen the tax net and do more of IGR. So for me, in terms of financing, that is the way to go. We can't continue to rely on borrowing to be able to do that, because even as it is, the debt service to revenue ratio is very high.
It is.
All right.
The DG budget,
yes, even
recently mentioned it.
Yes. And I also think this is free advice to the incoming administration, that the first thing to do, in my view, should be to commission a systems audit, a systems-wide audit, because of the so many loopholes we have in this country today. There should be a systems audit with respect to the budgeting system, the tax system, the procurement system, okay? Because these are where we have loopholes. You get maybe top firms And when you're doing that, you don't just appoint one firm, say KPMG or to do it. You appoint maybe two foreign firms and two local firms doing the same thing. And it's not about the firms coming together to share jobs. No, they will also be doing, exactly the same thing. Okay, it's only at the end of their work that you can come to harmonize. So what that will do is that you end up plugging loopholes such that it will be difficult for the Accountant General of the Federation, for example, to be to have opportunities to misappropriate funds. It will be difficult for the Minister of Power, for example, just as we've had recently, to alleged to have misappropriated funds. So by the time you plug these loopholes, you'll be saving so much. Okay, and if you now combine it with the savings you are going to get from or maybe reforms you are going to carry out, such as maybe fuel subsidy removal, you will have enough to be able to at least put in the implementation of this plan. So for the plan to work, you will need finances. That's the point I'm making. And for that to happen, you should start by plugging loopholes, reducing waste. Okay. The other day, I was listening to a governor saying that part of why he appointed so many aides was because he wanted to create employment opportunities. But to me, that is not a sustainable way of creating employment opportunities, because right now, if he's exiting, all those people he has also appointed as aides will also be exiting, and they will now be thrown into the unemployment market.
pool.
Yes.
So I have a slightly different opinion in terms of creating an enabling environment. I don't think that systems-wide audit is something the new government should embark on, and my reasons are simply because delay is detrimental, right? So doing another systems-wide audit will probably take about 6 months, and that doesn't allow the current government to hit the ground running. My view is that, look, we already know a lot of these issues, right? If you appoint responsible people with the right experience and the right understanding of accountability, and you put in place a new accountability framework that is, monitored by the National Assembly, either on a quarterly basis or on a biannual basis, like every 6 months, each minister or all the ministries, departments and agencies are required to submit specific reports on accountability and what they've been doing, right? And this can be reviewed. They should be made. I mean, we've made so many commitments in terms of e-government, transparency. We're still nowhere with a lot of those.
That's the more reason we should audit those systems, those processes, because even if you are creating a new one, you said get a new one, it has to be based on identified loopholes already identified. Okay,
yeah, but we
you
know
have
those,
this cup,
we
for
know
example,
those.
with a dirty water, and you're pouring clean water inside this cup. Of course, the water will still be dirty. Until you clean it up and put fresh water, you may not get results.
So, but why don't you give people the responsibility and the accountability to clean up their own enterprise, right, and report on those? I'm not saying that audit shouldn't be done, but I'm just saying I don't think it's the first thing to do. I think that when you put people in the right place who have the right responsibility and accountability, and then you bring them back later to understand what are the key issues that you have seen since you started running this ministry, right? So it's like a learning curve. Experience is the best teacher. Everybody knows this, right? Like whatever I know today is because I went to school, I did a master's in economic policy, I did, that gives you, when you graduate from school, they say you have passed through structured learning. And character, right, is expected to have come with you having passed through school. So if we're putting people in, responsibility positions, they should be responsible and they should be held accountable.
That of course, will take me to the whole question of who takes ownership of this new policy, this new agenda, especially against the backdrop of the fact that we have participation in the formation, in drawing up this agenda at a very wide base, from state to local government to private sector to civil society and all of that. But we'll talk about that when we return from this very short break. Stay with us. Thank you so much for staying with us. We are still looking at Nigeria Agenda 2050. My guests are Professor Uche Owaleke, who is the President, Capital Market Academics of Nigeria, and Mr. Oladayo Alao. He is a policy analyst. Gentlemen, thank you. So before we went for the break, we were talking about who takes ownership of this policy, of this agenda, and at what level?
It is it's a document that belongs to every Nigerian. Agenda 2050, should be seen, for what it is. And remember that in the formulation, we were meant to understand that the 3 tiers of government, they were involved. Civil society groups, were also involved. So I expect
the private sector?
Private sector, yes. So I expect that, of course, the implementation structure has also accommodated these, stakeholders, because I'm aware that even at the state level, the commissioners for finance and that of budget are also, part of this. So, as I said, ownership should cut across different stakeholders. But in that document, it has been specifically said, with respect to policies, programs, and projects, it is the ministries, departments, and agencies. Which is also why I said that we need to, first of all, look at those MDAs that are expected to implement. All right?
Whether or not they actually understand the import of the document and the strategies at achieving them.
Yes, and that's why I said that part of what we should do first should be to ensure that they are properly structured, and that the capacity is there, which also brings me to the issue of rationalizing the ministry, department, and agencies. Those with overlapping functions, should be rationalized. The Orasanya Good attended report is still there. If there is need to, review it, revise it, update it, and implement it, I think that should be done. If we don't do that, and we begin to implement based on existing structure, okay, we will be putting the cart before the horse. We will still end up having this. If you do the same thing, the same way, you don't expect a different result. Why I said the first thing is, I still stand by it. I'm talking from experience. I was Commissioner for Finance in Imo State, and when we started, that was the first thing we did. You do something like a systems-wide audit. You plug loopholes. All right. Today, I mean, it's more like consensus that even in the some of the reforms that we have today, talking about the TSA, talking about the IPPIS, the GIFMIS, that there are loopholes in those systems. So until we do a complete system in procurement today, we also know there are loopholes in our procurement processes. So why can't we fix these things before we begin to say, yes, let's start running with a plan? Because if we don't fix them, it's not the same people, the same process, the same systems that will implement the plan. And you end up, as I said, getting the same results. So
I think those are very fair and valid points, right? However, we can be honest with ourselves. We've known that a lot of these issues have existed for years. And I can tell you that if you walk into any ministry, department, or agency, the civil servants and the public servants that walk in there, they know what the issues are. They know what the issues are. The Orasanya report is a really good report. I've gone through that report several times. But I've actually had the practical experience. Even when we talk about bringing investments into the country and we want foreign direct investment and the private sector to come in, right? The overlapping functions of various ministries, departments, and agencies and overlapping policies creates tough wars that stalls progress on projects. And sometimes, just really turns off investors. So there are a number of issues around bringing in infrastructure investment. Now we have Infraco, which is another very interesting I mean, I understand the premise behind that, but we have for example the BPE, ICRC, the NIPC, and I don't see a lot of synergies how all of these agencies work. In fact, they have overlapping functions, which sometimes stalls investments, especially in the area of infrastructure. And we know that there's no secret that infrastructure drives growth. Without having adequate power, the roads, the right infrastructure in place, those are the enablers of growth actually and development. So I think it's important that instead of again focusing on the minutiae, the average Nigerian just wants a better life, right? Now we've put in place a framework to deliver on some of the promises that government has made. So I think the core focus should be on actually looking at where we are from a tactical perspective of the NDP 2021-2025. We're midway through. Where are we exactly? Okay, and then we understand and take lessons learned and take that and then revise if there is a need. The NDP 2021 to 2025 to ensure, okay, the NDP says that, we'll achieve, I think, GDP growth of, about 6%. I think.
Is it the
so,
2021, 2025?
2021 to 2025. 4.6%, yes, 4.6%. However, I think we're on target to make about 2.9% GDP growth this year. I mean, those are the kind of indices that we should be tracking and saying, what have we done wrong in terms of this plan that we now need to amend in order for us to achieve the objectives of this plan by 2025. And if we are even able to achieve like 60%, because, for example, I've been involved in the development of a lot of the federal government budgets in previous years, and when I sometimes do these triangulations of budget performance averages between 20 something to 30% maximum. It means that number one, our budgets are not even realistic, because budgets are based on expected revenue and then expenditure, right, which should balance, right? So if at the end of every year you are doing a performance review of your budget and you are hanging between 20 something percent to 30%, it means that your plan was wrong in the first place, right?
So is that?
So I mean, those are important things that I think that indices that we should use to then make amends and understand where we are getting it wrong, right? And then revising, if there is a need, the plan. So your question in terms of, involvement, in terms of delivery, I mean, the plan states it very clearly in terms of all the stakeholders that participated in developing this plan. The plan is also very clear, in terms of how they plan to monitor, this plan. I don't know if there is, I would suggest that the new government, when they come in, sit down, look at that plan again, and then set up a proper implementation or monitoring unit. One that gives, the executives, right, the legislators, and, I mean, all the other stakeholders an update, either on a biannual basis, and then we can sit back, because we do this on a daily basis. You plan in your home all the time, and you revisit the plan and say, where did I get this wrong? So I think the crux of this is that where we are falling short in the past has always been around implementation, monitoring and evaluation, and then replanning. So if we know that those are the biggest issues that we have, our focus, or the new government's focus, should be on reviewing this plan in terms of, it takes time to put together plans. You asked a very good question in terms of why are they releasing the plan. I mean, and a huge effort has gone in. Sitting down and looking through that document is a fantastic document, one that will stand out to any international scrutiny, right? Even in terms of the approach, the strategy, a brilliant document. But again, we said it, where we fall short is implementation. So I would suggest that, they put together either a policy coordination implementation unit that is monitoring how we are. I mean, like I mentioned Japan. Japan had a unit that's just all they did was report to the president and monitor how the plan was being, implemented. And look at where Japan is again today.
Yes,
Malaysia.
yes.
Lee Kuan Yew, if you read his book, he spoke about how, they monitored everything. How do you bring investments into the country? It's almost about hand-holding the investors, understanding what the investors want. Then going back, creating an enabling environment to enable the investments. So those are just a few.
Okay,
thoughts.
well, Alawo, the point you made about budget performance, also lends credence to, the point I was making about, you talked about persistent adverse budget variances. Why have we always had this, adverse budget, variances over time?
We know the reasons. If you ask the stakeholders,
yes.
You were a commissioner.
Yes.
I'm sure you know, if I asked you about, what were the key issues you faced when you were in Imo State, you can tell me exactly where the issues are.
Oh, yes, and that's why we need to look at the system. So we need to audit the
I just think, again, we have to be careful not to turn it.
We have been using
my biggest concern is that I don't want us to turn that into another focus and have a big exercise, 6 months.
No.
Especially with the new administration coming into place. What value would that be?
Oh yes, a lot of value. They don't need that long. When you get to, professional firms who also have very strong IT departments to do that.
But I think
there's a transition. It might slow down the new administration.
Exactly.
And prevent it from taking off the way it may want to, or Nigerians expect it to.
Absolutely.
Why are we going to be in a hurry implementing a medium-term plan? You have a plan of 2025, and you want to spend 1-2 months, to take off properly. Wouldn't that be justified?
You see,
and when it's not as if everything will come to a halt when you're even doing that. No, you understand?
As is typical with Nigeria, right? The minute we start to create all these big things, what happens is that you have a big exercise.
Everybody sits back.
Everybody sits back.
Yes, and waiting for
when the current administration, when President Muhammad Buhari was inaugurated, right? It was the same thing. Oh, let's look at they did an assessment 9 months. We didn't have any ministers.
Yes.
No, that wasn't why we didn't have ministers.
Look, it contributed to that. And I can tell you because, I was program manager, on the Nigerian Infrastructure Advisory Facility, which was advising the federal government of Nigeria on development, on infrastructure in all the key sectors. So I'm aware of a lot of things. I was on a number of committees. I supported a number of agencies. I've worked with them. I understand how a lot of them work. We don't need another big exercise. We're just going to create another big flurry that is going to delay. And delay is detrimental. We already have a plan in place. Why don't we know what the issues are. I tell you, Nigerians, we understand these things, and we can't do it. It's about, again, if you read every report that is written either locally by consultants or even by international donor organizations, of which I've worked with many of them. I've worked in 27 different countries, and I can tell you it's the same everywhere.
Now we have a budget system that is traditionally based, incremental based, okay? We have a system too that doesn't specify timelines for budget preparation, budget approval.
Okay. There's a budget calendar that is released annually.
No.
We're meant to stick to that.
We have the Fiscal Responsibility Act doesn't say anything about timelines with respect to when appropriation bill must be placed before the National Assembly. I'm only saying that system should be looked, revisited, reviewed. Yes. When this administration was coming into office, if you recall, they were talking about transiting from the traditional incremental to zero-based budgeting system.
Absolutely.
But that never happened. I am saying the current system as it is will continue to generate, because it has a lot of
being
loopholes.
a public financial management expert, I can tell you that it's always very hard to transition from those budgeting systems because you have too many ongoing projects. But one of the key things that this administration did, and let's give them kudos, is that there was a lot of focus on ongoing projects to get a lot of because we've had ministries, departments, and agencies carrying some projects for the last 19 years on their budget, right?
Well,
we have uncompleted projects of more than 22,000 sitting across the country. what the administration should be doing is sitting down, looking at those buckets of projects, the ones that bring the best value for money for Nigerians. From a social perspective, government should concentrate on those. We should look at some of those projects and just give them to private sector.
I wish, Mr. Alao, I wish that we had a lot more time. Our time is up for today, but we need to come back here because we need to look at this document in much detail and begin to also put on the table for the incoming administration what it ought to do moving forward, hit the ground running, and see what this, even the state governments, incoming state governments, may not be familiar. I'm sure most of them are not even familiar, apart from maybe those that are returning to office. The new governors will not be familiar. Local governments will not be familiar.
And we have a number of really new people coming.
Yes, and even at the legislative level, very new people. So they all need to take time to look at this document and be in tune with it for us to together look at the implementation processes and strategies. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Right.
Thank you for having
Professor Uche Owaleke, President, Capital Market Academics of Nigeria. Thank you so much for joining us. And Mr. Oladayo Alao is a policy analyst. Thank you so much.
And I'm the
we
CEO
expect you
of
to
the consultancy.
Yes.
So we do that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
We expect you back sometime very soon.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, that's our program for today. Thank you so much for investing your time with us. We'll see you again when we bring you a fresh edition of People, Politics, and Power. Bye for now.